A question that hurts. Have you ever sat alone at night, staring at the ceiling, asking yourself one quiet question that hurts more than it should? Why do you stay? Not just in a marriage, not just in a country, but in a life that feels heavy, slow, and confusing. In this video, I want to tell you a simple story from my own life in the United States, about love without papers, English without perfection, and why sometimes staying is the bravest thing you can do. If you're tired of starting over, this story is for you. You know what's strange? Nobody asks that question when things are easy. No one looks at you when you're laughing, when the bills are paid, when love feels light, and says, "Why do you stay?" That question only appears when life gets messy, when your English feels broken, when your marriage feels quiet in a scary way, when you're far from home, in a country that looks strong on the outside but feels cold on the inside. 2 weeks ago, I heard that question again. Not from a stranger. Not from immigration. From someone close. Someone who thought they were being practical. Why do you stay? You could leave. You don't need this stress. And I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because my body already knew the answer, even if my English couldn't explain it yet. If you're learning English, you know this feeling well. Your thoughts are deep, emotional, complex. But your words come out simple, slow, sometimes childish. You want to say, "I stay because love is not a transaction." But all you can say is, "I stay because it feels right." And then you feel small. Your brain starts whispering, maybe you're not smart enough. Maybe your English will never be enough. Maybe you should quit. Here's something science tells us, in a very human way. When your brain feels unsafe, it doesn't want growth. It wants escape. New language, new culture, new marriage stress. Your nervous system puts all of that in the same box and labels it danger. So your motivation drops. Your memory feels weak. You suddenly forget words you knew yesterday. That's not because you're bad at English. That's because your brain is trying to protect you. In the US, people talk fast. Life moves fast. Weather changes fast. One day it's sunny, the next day it's freezing. That instability doesn't just affect your skin. It affects your emotions. Studies show that sudden climate changes can increase stress hormones like cortisol. High cortisol makes learning harder. Focus drops. Patience disappears. And then you blame yourself. You say, "I'm lazy. I'm weak." But really, your body is just tired. When my English felt heavy, my marriage felt heavy too. Because language is not just grammar. Language is how you explain your pain. When you can't explain it well, you swallow it. And swallowed emotions don't disappear. They sit quietly between two people at the dinner table. They make silence loud. So when someone asked me, "Why do you stay?" they weren't just asking about my marriage. They were asking why I stay in this slow, frustrating process of learning English through real life. Why I stay in conversations where I need extra seconds. Why I stay in a country where I still feel like a guest. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Leaving is often easier than staying. Quitting English feels good for one day. Giving up on a relationship feels like relief at first. Your brain loves short-term comfort. Dopamine spikes when you escape discomfort. But meaning? Meaning grows slowly. Meaning needs patience. Meaning needs you to stay. I didn't marry for papers. I married for love. That sounds romantic, but love without convenience is not a movie. It's waking up and choosing to communicate, even when your sentences are broken. It's saying, "I don't know the right word, but this hurts." It's practicing English not from a textbook, but from arguments, apologies, jokes, and quiet forgiveness. If you're watching this to learn English, let me tell you something gently. You don't need perfect English to have a meaningful life. You need honest English. Slow English. English that comes from real moments. Research in language learning shows that emotional connection improves memory retention. When words are tied to feelings, they stick. That's why learning English through stories works. Especially stories that feel like your own. This video is not about success. It's about staying. Staying with the language. Staying with the discomfort. Staying with love when it's not shiny. Over the next parts, I'll share how climate, culture, and policy in the US quietly shaped my emotions, my marriage, and my English in just 2 weeks. No big drama. Just real life. So if you're asking yourself, why do I stay? Maybe the answer is not something you can say yet. Maybe it's something you're still becoming. And that's okay. Because sometimes, staying is not weakness. Sometimes, staying is how you finally hear your own voice. 2 weeks in America. 2 weeks sounds short, right? 14 days. Barely enough time to unpack a suitcase, let alone understand a country. But here's the strange thing about time in America. It stretches and shrinks at the same time. A single afternoon can feel endless, while an entire week disappears before you realize what just happened. And in those 2 weeks, my English, my emotions, and my marriage were tested in quiet, ordinary ways that textbooks never talk about. You might think moving around the US feels exciting every day. New streets. New accents. New routines. But excitement has a shadow side. Your brain is constantly scanning for rules. How loud should I speak? How close should I stand? Is this joke okay here? That constant scanning is exhausting. Neuroscience calls this cognitive load. When your brain is overloaded, learning slows down. That's why you can study English for hours and still feel like nothing sticks. In my first days, I noticed how much silence exists in American life. Not empty silence, but private silence. People smile, say "How are you?" and keep walking. Nobody waits for the real answer. Back home, conversations linger. In America, conversations move. That difference sounds small, but emotionally it's huge. When you're learning English, you already need more time, more pauses, more patience. And suddenly, you're in a culture that values speed. I remember standing in a grocery store aisle, trying to decide between two kinds of bread. Too many options. Too many labels. My partner asked me a simple question. I knew the answer in my head, but the words came out wrong. I laughed it off, but inside, something sank. That tiny moment followed me all day. This is how motivation slowly leaks away. Not through big failures, but through small, repeated frustrations. Psychologists call this microstress. One moment doesn't break you, but many small moments stack up. And when you're also managing a relationship, those stresses don't stay personal. They spill into tone, into silence, into misunderstandings. You snap faster. You withdraw quicker. You assume things that were never said. During those 2 weeks, I started noticing how policies and systems quietly shape emotions. Simple things like paperwork, appointments, and official letters. Everything is polite, but distant. Clear, but cold. If English isn't your first language, every form feels like a test you didn't study for. And when your life includes marriage and legal responsibilities, the pressure doubles. You don't just want to understand English. You need to. This is where many people give up. Not dramatically. Just quietly. They stop practicing speaking. They avoid conversations. They stay in safe circles. Their English freezes at a certain level, not because they can't improve, but because improving feels emotionally expensive. But here's what those 2 weeks taught me. Real English doesn't live in confidence. It lives in repetition, in boring routines, in showing up tired. Studies on language acquisition show that consistent, low-pressure exposure works better than intense, stressful study. 5 minutes of real conversation beats 1 hour of anxious memorization. That's why living your life in English, slowly, imperfectly, actually works. In my marriage, those 2 weeks were not romantic. They were practical. Conversations about schedules, weather complaints, small disagreements about money and time. But something interesting happened. Because my English was slower, my words were simpler. And because my words were simpler, they were more honest. I couldn't hide behind fancy language. I had to say what I meant. There's a strange gift in limited language. You don't over-explain. You don't decorate your feelings. You say, I'm tired. I feel lost. I need time. And those sentences land harder than perfect grammar ever could. At night, I practiced English quietly. Not from an app. From the day itself. I replayed conversations in my head. I corrected one sentence. Just one. That's it. Cognitive science supports this approach. Reflection strengthens neural pathways. Your brain learns better when you review meaningful experiences, not random sentences. 2 weeks also showed me how climate affects behavior. Cold mornings made everything feel heavier. Dark skies slowed my thoughts. Research links reduced sunlight to lower serotonin levels, which impacts mood and motivation. So if you're learning English in a place where the weather feels harsh, your struggle is not imaginary. It's biological. And yet, something shifted. Not dramatically, but quietly. By the end of the second week, I noticed I wasn't translating everything anymore. Some phrases came naturally. Not fast, but naturally. My confidence didn't grow from success. It grew from survival. That's the part nobody tells you. You don't build a new life in America through big wins. You build it by staying through small discomforts, through awkward pauses, through misunderstandings that don't end the world. If you're learning English and living a life that feels heavy, don't ask yourself why it's so hard. Ask yourself how much you've already survived. 2 weeks might change nothing on the outside. But inside, they can quietly teach you that you're stronger than you think. And that realization? That's where real progress begins. Climate shocked my body. Have you ever woken up and felt tired before the day even started, even though nothing bad happened? That was my body's first honest reaction to the climate here. Not my thoughts. Not my attitude. My body. Because before your brain understands a new country, your nervous system feels it. And in the United States, climate doesn't just change the weather. It quietly changes who you are during the day. In those 2 weeks, the temperature swings felt personal. One morning, the air was dry and sharp, biting my skin as soon as I stepped outside. By afternoon, the sun was warm enough to trick me into thinking everything was fine. That constant contrast confused my body. I felt alert but exhausted at the same time. And when your body is confused, your English follows. You might not realize this, but language lives in the body first. When your shoulders are tense, your breathing is shallow. When your breathing is shallow, your voice gets smaller. And when your voice gets smaller, you speak less. This is not a personality flaw. It's biology. Studies show that sudden changes in temperature and humidity affect the autonomic nervous system. That system controls stress responses, focus, and memory. In simple words, climate can make learning feel harder without you doing anything wrong. I noticed it when I tried to speak English in the mornings. My sentences felt heavier. My mouth moved slower. Words I knew felt far away, like they were hiding behind fog. At first, I blamed myself. I thought, why am I getting worse? But then I realized something important. On days when the weather was stable, my English felt lighter. On days when it changed suddenly, everything felt harder, including love. Climate affects mood. Mood affects communication. Communication affects relationships. It's a chain reaction nobody warns you about. When I felt physically uncomfortable, I became quieter. When I became quieter, my partner assumed I was upset. When misunderstandings grow, silence fills the space. And silence, when it lasts too long, feels like distance. In colder regions of the US, people move differently. They walk faster. They talk less. They protect their space. That's not rudeness. That's adaptation. But if you come from a warmer climate where conversations flow slowly and bodies relax easily, this difference can feel like rejection. Your brain starts asking dangerous questions. Did I say something wrong? Do they not like me? And those questions drain motivation fast. This is where many English learners give up emotionally. They don't stop studying. They stop believing. They show up physically, but mentally they retreat. Neuroscience calls this learned helplessness. When effort doesn't bring immediate comfort, the brain decides effort is useless. And once that belief settles in, progress stalls. But here's the part that changed everything for me. I stopped fighting my body. Instead of forcing productivity, I adjusted my expectations. On cold, heavy days, I spoke less but listened more. On warmer, calmer days, I practiced speaking. Research shows that aligning learning with physical state improves retention. Your brain learns best when it feels safe, not pressured. I also changed how I practiced English. Instead of long sessions, I used short, grounded moments. One sentence while making coffee. One observation about the weather out loud. It's colder today. Simple. Real. No performance. This method works because it connects language to the present moment. Mindfulness-based learning reduces stress hormones and improves focus. Again, not motivation. Regulation. Climate also reshaped how I understood love here. Romance in movies looks warm and dramatic. Real love in a cold climate is quieter. It's shared blankets. It's noticing when the other person is low energy. It's not taking silence personally. That realization softened me. I stopped interpreting quiet moments as emotional distance. Sometimes, it was just winter speaking. When my body adapted, my English followed. Not quickly, but steadily. I started recognizing patterns instead of memorizing rules. My pronunciation improved because my breathing improved. My confidence grew because I stopped rushing. Confidence doesn't come from sounding perfect. It comes from feeling grounded. There's scientific evidence behind this. Deep, slow breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which supports learning and social connection. Cold air makes people breathe shallowly. Once I noticed that, I intentionally slowed my breath before speaking. Suddenly, words came easier. Not better. Easier. This is something I want you to hear clearly. If you're learning English in a new climate and everything feels harder, you're not broken. Your system is adapting. Adaptation looks messy before it looks smooth. Just like love. Just like marriage. Just like building a life far from where you started. Climate shocked my body. But it also taught me respect for my limits. And once I respected those limits, progress returned quietly. No big breakthrough. No dramatic moment. Just fewer bad days. More neutral ones. And eventually, some good ones. So if today feels heavy, don't ask yourself what's wrong with you. Ask yourself what your body needs. Warmth. Rest. Simplicity. Language will follow. Love will follow. And staying will feel a little less painful. Culture in small moments. Culture rarely hits you like a wave. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't explain the rules. It hides in small moments, the kind you almost ignore, until they pile up and quietly change how you see yourself. In America, culture revealed itself to me not through big events, but through tiny interactions that made me pause, hesitate, and sometimes doubt myself. Have you ever said hello to someone and felt like your voice arrived 1 second too late? That happened to me a lot. People here are friendly, but efficient. Smiles are quick. Greetings are short. Conversations often end before you feel they've begun. Back home, a greeting is an invitation. Here, it's a signal. That difference sounds harmless, but emotionally, it can feel like standing at a door that closes too fast. For someone learning English, those moments matter. You prepare sentences in your head, and suddenly, the moment passes. Your brain says, never mind. That repeated experience trains silence. Over time, you speak less, not because you don't want to, but because timing feels risky. And when you speak less, you practice less. Motivation fades quietly. Cultural psychologists call this high context versus low context communication. In many cultures, meaning lives between the lines. In American culture, meaning lives in clarity and speed. Say what you mean. Say it fast. If you don't, people move on. This isn't cruelty. It's efficiency. But if you weren't raised in it, your nervous system reads it as dismissal. I noticed it in coffee shops. You order quickly or you hold up the line. You're expected to know what you want before you speak. But learning English means thinking while speaking. That extra second feels expensive. I felt my chest tighten every time it was my turn. Not fear, pressure. And pressure is the enemy of language. At home, this pressure leaked into my marriage. Small cultural misunderstandings turned into emotional ones. In my culture, quiet can mean comfort. In American culture, quiet can mean distance. So when I stayed silent to process, my partner worried. When my partner spoke directly, I felt overwhelmed. Same moment. Different cultural meanings. This is where many couples struggle without realizing why. They think the problem is love, or effort, or personality. But often, it's culture operating invisibly. Research on intercultural relationships shows that misunderstandings increase not because of conflict, but because of different default expectations. You expect warmth. They expect clarity. Both are valid. Neither is wrong. I started paying attention to the smallest details. How people apologize quickly and move on. How they respect personal space. How I'm busy is not rejection, but information. These details taught me something important. American culture values emotional self-regulation. You're expected to manage your feelings privately and show up functional. That can feel cold if you come from a culture where emotions are shared openly. This realization changed how I learned English. Instead of trying to sound expressive, I focused on sounding clear. Short sentences. Simple words. Noi mouschen de keraschen. Strangely, this made conversations easier. Not deeper, but smoother. And smoothness builds confidence. Science backs this up. Cognitive load theory shows that reducing complexity improves performance under stress. When you simplify language, your brain frees up resources to read social cues. You stop panicking about grammar and start noticing tone, timing, and context. That's where real communication lives. Culture also showed up in how people talk about love and marriage. Questions were practical. Do you work? Do you plan to stay? Is this permanent? These questions weren't judgmental. They were cultural. In the US, stability is a value. Planning is safety. But when your marriage began with emotion, not strategy, those questions can sting. That's when I realized something important. Cultural differences don't ask you to change who you are. They ask you to translate yourself. Translation takes energy. And energy is limited. That's why some days feel heavier than others. It's not laziness. It's cultural fatigue. I started giving myself permission to be slower, to miss cues, to misunderstand and ask again. Asking again is powerful. It signals respect. It invites clarity. And clarity builds connection in this culture. One small sentence helped me a lot. Can you say that again slowly? Simple. Honest. Effective. In marriage, I learned to name the difference instead of fighting it. When I'm quiet, I'm thinking. When you speak directly, it helps me understand. Those sentences weren't perfect English, but they were perfect bridges. Culture in small moments taught me humility. It taught me that fitting in is not disappearing. It's adjusting without erasing yourself. And that lesson applied to English too. You don't need to sound native. You need to sound present. So if you feel tired from small things, awkward pauses, missed jokes, quick goodbyes, know this: those moments are not proof you don't belong. They are proof you are learning. Culture doesn't welcome you loudly. It waits to see if you stay. And staying, even in small moments, is how understanding slowly begins. English in real life. If you've ever opened an English textbook and felt strangely confident, then stepped outside and felt completely lost, you're not alone. Real English does not sound like lessons. It sounds unfinished, interrupted, casual, and sometimes wrong. And that realization hit me hard during those 2 weeks in the US, when I stopped studying English and started living inside it. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody tells you early enough. English in real life is not designed to help you. It's designed to save time. People cut sentences. They swallow words. They assume context. And if you're waiting for perfect pronunciation and polite pacing, you'll be waiting forever. At first, this feels unfair. Then, slowly, it becomes freeing. I remember a short exchange at a gas station. The cashier said something I didn't fully catch. My brain froze, trying to translate. Old me would smile and nod. New me tried something different. I said, "Sorry, slow please." 3 words. Not elegant. Not confident. But honest. And suddenly, the world didn't collapse. The cashier repeated it. Slower. Life continued. That moment mattered more than any lesson. Because confidence is not the absence of mistakes. It's the willingness to stay present while making them. In daily life, English showed up everywhere. Weather comments, small jokes, practical questions. None of it dramatic. And that's the point. Language learning improves fastest when the stakes are low but consistent. Linguistic research confirms this. Frequent, meaningful exposure builds fluency better than rare high-pressure practice. At home, English became the language of logistics. Grocery lists. Schedules. Simple check-ins. Are you tired? Do you want tea? These sentences repeated daily. And repetition is the brain's favorite teacher. The hippocampus strengthens memory through patterns, not intensity. That's why one sentence used 10 times beats 10 sentences used once. But real-life English also brought real-life emotions. When I was upset, my vocabulary shrank. When I was calm, it expanded. This isn't a flaw. It's how stress affects working memory. Studies show that emotional stress reduces access to vocabulary. So if your English disappears during conflict, you're not bad at English. You're human. In my marriage, this showed clearly. During disagreements, I couldn't express nuance. So I learned to express truth instead. I feel pressure. I need time. Those sentences weren't perfect, but they were clear. Clarity prevents escalation. And escalation kills communication faster than bad grammar ever will. I also learned to listen differently. Instead of chasing every word, I listened for intention. Tone. Body language. Key phrases. This skill matters more than vocabulary size. Comprehension is not translation. It's pattern recognition. Once you stop trying to understand everything, you start understanding enough. Real English taught me humility. It stripped away performance. There was no audience, no test, just moments. And in those moments, English stopped being a subject and became a tool. A tool to order food, to apologize, to connect, to survive awkwardness. One powerful shift happened when I stopped correcting myself mid-sentence. Self-correction breaks flow and increases anxiety. Language acquisition research shows that fluency improves when learners prioritize communication over accuracy. Accuracy follows later, naturally. I let mistakes exist. And suddenly, speaking felt lighter. In the US, people value directness. So I practiced saying what I needed without extra explanation. I don't understand. Can you repeat? I'm learning English. These sentences work because they set expectations. They invite cooperation. Most people respond kindly when they know what's happening. Real English also taught me about boundaries. It's okay to pause. It's okay to say nothing. Silence is not failure. Sometimes it's processing. That understanding reduced pressure in my marriage too. We stopped filling every quiet moment. We let some of them breathe. By the end of those 2 weeks, my English wasn't better in a measurable way. My accent didn't change. My grammar wasn't perfect. But something deeper shifted. I trusted myself more. I stopped waiting to feel ready. Readiness is a myth. Usage creates readiness, not the other way around. If you're learning English through real life, here's a gentle guideline. Use what you know where you are with who you're with. Don't wait for confidence. Let action build it. Science supports this. Behavioral activation increases motivation, not the reverse. English in real life is messy. But mess is where learning hides. And once you accept that, language stops being a wall and starts becoming a door. You don't need to sound perfect to belong. You need to stay engaged. One sentence at a time. Love without papers. People love simple explanations. They want clean stories with clear reasons. So when they hear about a marriage that crosses cultures and borders, the first question is often not "How do you feel?" but "Why did you do it?" And right after that comes the quieter, sharper question, "Was it for papers?" That question doesn't arrive as an insult. It arrives dressed as logic, as concern, as realism. But it still cuts, because it reduces something deeply human into something transactional. Love becomes a strategy. Marriage becomes paperwork. And suddenly, your feelings are put on trial. I didn't marry for papers. But saying that out loud in English feels heavier than it should. Not because it's untrue, but because English, especially practical American English, loves reasons that can be proven. Love without documents sounds fragile in a system built on forms, timelines, and eligibility. In those 2 weeks, I felt that tension constantly. At appointments. In casual conversations. Even in my own thoughts. When systems are everywhere, you start internalizing their logic. You start questioning your own story. Am I naive? Am I unrealistic? Should love be enough? This is where language and emotion collide. When your English is limited, you can't easily defend complexity. You can't explain how love grows slowly, how commitment deepens quietly, how staying is sometimes a choice you renew every morning. All you can say is, "We love each other." And that sentence sounds small next to a legal system. Psychologically, this creates something called identity threat. When the world questions the legitimacy of your choices, your sense of self feels unstable. Research shows that identity threat increases anxiety and reduces cognitive performance. That means your English gets worse exactly when you need it most. Not because you're weak, but because you're under pressure. In my marriage, this pressure showed up subtly. We talked more about plans, about timelines, about what-ifs, less about feelings. Not because love disappeared, but because survival took center stage. Love became quiet. Practicality became loud. And when love goes quiet, doubt gets a microphone. But here's the thing nobody says clearly enough. Love without papers is not careless. It's vulnerable. It's choosing someone without guarantees. And vulnerability is uncomfortable in cultures that value security. In the US, stability is admired. Predictability is praised. Risk is acceptable only when it looks controlled. I started noticing how this mindset affected my English too. I became cautious. I overthought sentences. I tried to sound serious instead of sincere. That's when speaking felt hardest. Language flows best when emotion is allowed. When you suppress feeling, words tighten. So I did something small but important. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending my marriage with logic. Instead, I named experience. We chose each other. We're learning. We're staying. Short sentences. No justification. Just truth. This aligns with something powerful in psychology. When you simplify narratives under stress, you reduce cognitive load. The brain relaxes. Communication improves. You don't convince everyone, but you reconnect with yourself. In private moments, love without papers looked different. It was quiet teamwork, sharing responsibility, navigating uncertainty together, making space for fear without letting it decide everything. This kind of love doesn't perform well in conversations. It doesn't sound impressive, but it feels solid. Learning English inside this kind of relationship taught me something unexpected. You don't need advanced language to build trust. You need consistency. Tone. Presence. Studies on relationship communication show that emotional attunement matters more than verbal precision. How you say something often matters more than what you say. When my English failed, my intention carried me. When my words were wrong, my effort was visible. And that effort became a shared language. One that didn't need perfect grammar. Love without papers also forced me to sit with uncertainty. And uncertainty is where growth hides. Neuroscience tells us that the brain resists uncertainty because it can't predict outcomes. But learning, real learning, happens precisely in those unpredictable spaces. Language grows there. Identity grows there. I realized that staying in this marriage mirrored staying with English. Neither offered immediate reward. Both asked for patience. Both tested my ego. And both quietly gave me something stronger than confidence, resilience. If you're listening to this and you're learning English through a life that doesn't look safe or simple, hear this clearly. You don't need external validation to make your choices real. You don't need perfect sentences to make your love legitimate. Love without papers taught me how to stand without proof. English without perfection taught me how to speak without fear. Together, they taught me that meaning doesn't come from approval. It comes from staying present when leaving would be easier. And that kind of staying? It changes you in ways no document ever could. Marriage under pressure. Pressure doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't knock. It seeps in through ordinary days and sits quietly between two people who love each other but are tired. That's how marriage under pressure feels. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just heavy in a way that's hard to name. Especially when your English isn't strong enough to explain it. In those 2 weeks, Pressure came from everywhere at once. Policies, timelines, questions that sounded polite but carried weight. What's next? How long will this take? What if it doesn't work? Each question felt reasonable. Together, they felt like a countdown. And when life feels like a countdown, love starts holding its breath. You might think pressure makes people communicate more. Sometimes it does. But often, it does the opposite. Under stress, the brain shifts into survival mode. Neuroscience calls this the fight-or-flight response. Blood moves away from areas responsible for complex thinking and language. That's why conversations get simpler, sharper, or disappear entirely. You're not avoiding communication. Your brain is prioritizing safety. In my marriage, that showed up as practicality taking over emotion. We talked about schedules instead of dreams, about documents instead of feelings, about outcomes instead of connection. Not because love was gone, but because fear was loud. Fear of instability, fear of misunderstanding, fear of saying the wrong thing in the wrong language. This is where English learners often blame themselves unfairly. If my English were better, this wouldn't happen. That thought is seductive and wrong. Pressure changes communication even for native speakers. Studies on marital stress show that external pressures reduce empathy temporarily. People listen less deeply. They respond faster. They protect themselves. I noticed how quickly misunderstandings escalated. A short answer sounded cold. A pause sounded like distance. Tone replaced intention. And once tone becomes the focus, meaning gets lost. That's dangerous for any relationship, but especially for one crossing cultures and languages. Policies don't care about feelings. They care about consistency, proof, deadlines. Living inside that system can make you internalize its logic. You start evaluating your marriage the way a form does. Stable or unstable. Valid or questionable. Approved or delayed. And when love gets measured that way, it shrinks. What helped wasn't better arguments. It was naming the pressure itself. One evening, instead of discussing details, I said something simple: I feel under pressure. No explanation. No solution. Just naming it. That sentence changed the room. Because pressure, once named, stops hiding. Psychology supports this. Emotional labeling reduces amygdala activity, the part of the brain responsible for fear. When you name a feeling, your nervous system calms slightly. Communication improves. You don't solve the problem, but you soften it. And softness matters. Marriage under pressure taught me the value of slow conversations. Not long ones. Slow ones. Fewer words. More pauses. Letting silence exist without panic. Silence is not absence. Sometimes, it's integration. The brain needs time to catch up with emotion, especially in a second language. I also learned that pressure exposes habits. When stressed, people return to defaults. Cultural defaults. Emotional defaults. My default was withdrawal. My partner's default was problem-solving. Neither was wrong. But without awareness, they clashed. Withdrawal looked like avoidance. Problem-solving looked like control. Once we saw that pattern, we stopped personalizing it. That shift mattered. Because personalization turns pressure into blame. And blame erodes trust faster than stress ever could. From a learning perspective, this period was brutal for motivation. English felt associated with stress. Every official email. Every appointment. Every serious conversation. My brain started linking English to danger. That's a known phenomenon in psychology called negative association. When learning becomes emotionally costly, avoidance follows. So I had to separate English from pressure. I practiced English in safe spaces. Light conversations. Neutral topics. Even silence with subtitles on. I reminded my brain that English wasn't the enemy. This matters. Because the brain doesn't learn well in threat mode. Safety comes first. Marriage under pressure also clarified something essential. Love doesn't remove stress. It changes how you carry it. Some days, we carried it badly. Some days, we carried it together. Together was enough. I stopped expecting marriage to feel stable during instability. That expectation was unrealistic. Stability is not a feeling. It's a commitment to return to each other after hard days. Especially when language fails. If you're living inside pressure, immigration pressure, financial pressure, cultural pressure, know this. Struggle doesn't mean you chose wrong. It means you chose something real. Something that requires adaptation. Pressure doesn't test love's existence. It tests love's flexibility. And flexibility grows slowly, through patience, not perfection. Marriage under pressure taught me that staying is not passive. It's active endurance. Quiet negotiation. Daily recommitment. And sometimes the bravest thing you can say, in any language, is simply, "This is hard but I'm still here." Why I almost gave up. There's a specific moment when giving up feels logical. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just reasonable. It arrives quietly, usually at the end of a long day, when your brain is tired of trying. That's the moment I almost gave up, on English, on explaining myself, and dangerously close, on believing that staying was worth it. You might recognize this moment. It's when motivation doesn't crash, it dissolves. You're not angry. You're not sad. You're empty. And emptiness is persuasive. It whispers, "You've done enough." It says, "Maybe this is as far as you go." And because you're exhausted, you listen. In those 2 weeks, I reached that point one evening after a conversation that shouldn't have mattered. Nothing was said wrong. Nothing was solved. It was just incomplete. My words felt small. My meaning felt trapped. I wanted to say something deep, something reassuring, something adult. Instead, I said something basic. The room went quiet. Not tense. Just flat. That's when my brain did what tired brains do best. It generalized. If I can't say this, what else will I never say? That question spiraled fast. English stopped being a language and became a symbol. A symbol of everything I couldn't control. Everything I couldn't speed up. Psychology calls this cognitive collapse under load. When mental resources are depleted, the brain shifts to all-or-nothing thinking. One bad moment becomes proof of a permanent limit. That's not truth. That's fatigue speaking. But in that moment, it felt convincing. I sat there thinking about how easy it would be to stop trying, to speak less, to care less, to emotionally withdraw and call it peace. Many people mistake withdrawal for self-care. Sometimes it is. But sometimes, it's just exhaustion wearing a calm mask. Here's what almost broke me. The idea that effort wasn't changing anything. I had been practicing, listening, trying, and yet, the gap between what I felt and what I could say still existed. That gap hurt. And the brain hates unresolved gaps. It would rather quit than tolerate uncertainty. Neuroscience explains this well. The brain seeks efficiency. When effort doesn't produce immediate reward, dopamine drops. Motivation follows dopamine. So when progress is slow, the brain suggests quitting, not because quitting is good, but because it conserves energy. This is why so many people quit learning English right before improvement accelerates. Language acquisition is nonlinear. Progress feels invisible until it suddenly isn't. But you don't feel that when you're inside the fog. In that moment, my marriage felt like another unsolved problem. Not because we were failing, but because everything felt unfinished. English sentences unfinished. Conversations unfinished. Certainty unfinished. When multiple areas of life feel unresolved, the brain looks for an exit. The exit was tempting. It sounded like rest. Like relief. Like silence without explanation. What stopped me wasn't inspiration. It wasn't love speeches or motivational quotes. It was something smaller and less romantic. I noticed my breathing. Shallow. Fast. My body wasn't asking me to quit. It was asking me to slow down. That awareness mattered. Because when the body is overloaded, the mind lies. It tells stories that match exhaustion, not reality. I didn't fix anything that night. I didn't push through. I didn't practice English. I didn't solve the marriage. I did one thing. I didn't decide. I postponed the decision to quit. That sounds insignificant. It isn't. Psychological research shows that delaying decisions during emotional fatigue leads to better long-term outcomes. Your future self thinks more clearly than your exhausted self. So instead of asking, "Should I give up?" I asked, "Can I decide this tomorrow?" Tomorrow the feeling was still there, but weaker. The fog lifted just enough to see that quitting would solve discomfort, not the problem. And discomfort is temporary. Problems need patience. I realized something uncomfortable but freeing. Giving up would not protect me from pain. It would only protect me from growth. And growth, by definition, feels unstable. This applies directly to English learning. When language feels tied to shame or frustration, avoidance feels safe. But avoidance freezes progress. Engagement, even imperfect, keeps the system flexible. Marriage is similar. You don't leave because of one hard week. You leave when you stop believing repair is possible. That belief almost left me. Almost. What brought it back wasn't confidence. It was honesty. I admitted, to myself first, that I was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by language. By expectations. By the idea that I needed to be clearer, stronger, faster than I was. Once I admitted that, the pressure eased slightly. And with less pressure, words returned slowly. Not beautiful words, but usable ones. Almost giving up taught me this. The urge to quit is often a signal, not a solution. A signal that something needs adjustment, not abandonment. If you're there right now, tired of learning, tired of explaining, tired of staying, don't ask yourself whether you should quit. Ask yourself whether you're rested enough to decide. Because most breakthroughs don't come after motivation. They come after survival. After you stay one more day without certainty. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. One small turning point. Turning points are usually described as moments that look important from the outside. Big decisions. Big speeches. Big changes. But the real turning point for me was so small that I almost missed it. No announcement. No dramatic shift. Just one quiet adjustment that changed how everything felt afterward. It happened on an ordinary morning. Nothing special. No breakthrough. I woke up tired, still carrying the heaviness from the days before. My English didn't feel better. My situation hadn't changed. And yet, something was different. Not in my life, but in how I approached it. Instead of asking myself, how do I fix everything? I asked a smaller question, what is one thing I can make easier today? Not better. Not perfect. Easier. That question matters because the brain responds differently to it. When you aim for improvement, pressure rises. When you aim for ease, resistance drops. Psychological studies show that reducing task difficulty increases follow-through more reliably than increasing motivation. Motivation is unreliable. Ease is practical. So I made one change. I stopped trying to speak well. I decided to speak simply. Not politely. Not impressively. Just clearly enough to be understood. That day, I used shorter sentences on purpose. I didn't explain background. I didn't justify emotions. I didn't search for better words. I let basic language carry the weight. And something unexpected happened. People responded faster. Conversations felt smoother. Not deeper, but lighter. Lightness matters when you're exhausted. This shift also changed my marriage in subtle ways. Instead of trying to express everything I felt, I expressed one feeling at a time. I'm tired. Full stop. No explanation. No apology. That sentence didn't solve anything, but it reduced tension. It made space. Research in communication psychology shows that simplicity improves emotional accuracy. When messages are short and direct, they're less likely to be misinterpreted. Especially across cultures. Especially in a second language. That one change, choosing ease over improvement, broke the cycle of pressure. And once pressure dropped, capacity returned. My brain felt less defensive. Words came back naturally. Not many, but enough. This is important if you're learning English through real life. Progress doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from lowering the cost of participation. When speaking feels expensive, you avoid it. When speaking feels cheap, energetically, you do it more. Frequency beats intensity. The turning point wasn't confidence. It was permission. Permission to be slow. To be basic. To be understood without being impressive. I also stopped correcting myself in real time. Correction can wait. Flow can't. Language acquisition research supports this strongly. Fluency develops faster when learners allow errors during speech and reflect later. Real-time correction interrupts cognitive processing and increases anxiety. That day, I let sentences end imperfectly. And I noticed something else. People rarely corrected me. They cared about meaning, not form. Most communication happens below grammar level. Tone, intention, context. When those are clear, mistakes disappear into the background. The same applied emotionally. I stopped trying to be the strong one. I didn't hide uncertainty. I named it simply. I'm not sure. That sentence became powerful. It invited collaboration instead of debate. One small turning point doesn't remove problems, but it changes your relationship to them. Problems feel less personal, less permanent, more workable. From a neurological perspective, this makes sense. Lower stress improves prefrontal cortex function, the part of the brain responsible for language, decision-making, and emotional regulation. When stress drops, capacity rises. Not magically, gradually. By the end of that day, nothing external had changed. Policies were the same. English was the same. The marriage was the same. But my experience of all three was different. Less heavy. More flexible. That's the thing about turning points. They don't always move you forward. Sometimes, they stop you from moving backward. If you're stuck, emotionally, linguistically, relationally, try this. Don't aim higher. Aim gentler. Ask yourself what one small adjustment would reduce friction today. Not forever. Just today. Learning English doesn't require constant ambition. It requires continuity. Marriage doesn't require constant certainty. It requires willingness to adjust. That one small turning point taught me that staying isn't about endurance alone. It's about adaptation. Quiet, humble adaptation that doesn't look impressive but works. And once you experience that shift, you realize something important. You don't need a new life. You need a softer way of living, the one you're already in. Family changes everything. There's a moment when life quietly rearranges your priorities without asking permission. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels practical. Almost boring. And that's how family changes everything. Not through big speeches or emotional breakthroughs, but through daily responsibility that slowly reshapes how you think, speak, and stay. Before family became central in my life here, I thought motivation came from goals. Improve English. Build stability. Figure things out. But family doesn't run on goals. It runs on needs. Someone needs breakfast. Someone needs patience. Someone needs you to show up even when you're tired and unsure. And when needs take over, excuses lose power. In those 2 weeks, I noticed how family pulled me out of my head. When you're alone, your thoughts loop. You analyze every mistake, every awkward sentence, every silence. But when family is present, the loop breaks. Attention moves outward. And that shift matters more than it sounds. Psychologically, this is called external grounding. When focus moves from self-monitoring to caregiving or shared routine, anxiety decreases. Anxiety consumes cognitive resources. When it drops, language improves, not because you studied more, but because your brain isn't fighting itself. I saw this clearly in my English. When I spoke for myself, I hesitated. When I spoke for family, I acted. Asking questions. Clarifying details. Solving problems. There was no time to sound good. Only time to be understood. And in that urgency, English flowed more naturally. Family also changed how I understood staying. Staying stopped being a personal challenge and became a collective one. Decisions weren't just about my comfort or growth anymore. They affected others. That awareness added weight, but also meaning. Meaning stabilizes motivation better than ambition ever could. In marriage, family softened conflict. Not because problems disappeared, but because perspective widened. Disagreements felt smaller next to shared responsibility. Not insignificant, just contextualized. Research on family systems shows that shared purpose reduces emotional reactivity. When people feel aligned around care, they argue less defensively. I noticed how communication changed too. fewer explanations, more signals, eye contact, tone, timing. Language became efficient, not cold-focused. And that efficiency helped my English. I stopped searching for perfect phrases and started trusting shared understanding. Family also redefined success. Success stopped meaning progress on paper. It started meaning emotional availability, being present, being reliable. Those qualities don't require advanced vocabulary. They require consistency. And consistency is something you can practice every day, regardless of language level. One surprising thing happened. My fear of making mistakes dropped. Not because I stopped caring, but because caring shifted direction. When your priority is connection, ego loses control. Ego wants to sound smart. Connection wants to be clear. Clear always wins in real life. There's strong evidence for this. Language learners who use a second language for caregiving or family coordination develop pragmatic fluency faster. They learn what works, not what impresses. Real communication trains the brain better than theoretical perfection. Family also slowed time. Routines create rhythm. Rhythm creates predictability. Predictability calms the nervous system. And a calm nervous system learns better. That's neuroscience, not motivation talk. When cortisol drops, memory improves. When safety increases, curiosity returns. I found myself repeating the same phrases daily. It's okay. We'll figure it out. Let's try again. Those phrases became anchors. Not just linguistically, but emotionally. They reminded me that uncertainty didn't mean danger. It meant process. This shift mattered deeply in my marriage. Love stopped being something we evaluated and started being something we practiced. Practice is imperfect by nature. You don't quit practice because it's messy. You expect it to be. Family taught me patience in a way no language app ever could. Patience with silence. Patience with misunderstanding. Patience with slow progress. And patience is the hidden skill behind fluency. Without it, everything feels urgent. With it, everything feels possible. If you're learning English while building a family, or simply living inside responsibility, know this. You are not falling behind. You are training a different muscle. One that values continuity over speed. Presence over performance. Family doesn't remove pressure. It redistributes it. It makes some things heavier and others lighter. It makes quitting less attractive and staying more meaningful. By the end of those weeks, I realized something quietly powerful. Family didn't fix my English. It gave my English a reason. And reasons outlast motivation. When language serves love, learning stops being optional. It becomes part of living. And living, even when hard, keeps moving forward. English saved my voice. There's a strange moment in learning a new language when silence feels safer than speaking. You know what you want to say, but you're not sure how it will land. So you wait. You simplify too much. Or you say nothing at all. That silence almost became my habit, until I realized something uncomfortable. English wasn't stealing my voice. My fear was. For a long time, I treated English like a test I was always about to fail. Every sentence felt like a performance. Every conversation felt like judgment. And when language feels like judgment, you protect yourself by disappearing. You shrink your presence. You reduce your needs. You become easy. That might keep peace for a while, but it slowly erases you. In those 2 weeks, I saw clearly how silence had crept into my marriage. Not angry silence. Polite silence. The kind that avoids conflict but also avoids truth. I thought I was being considerate. But in reality, I was avoiding the discomfort of imperfect expression. Psychology has a name for this: self-silencing. It often appears in relationships under stress, especially when power dynamics or language barriers exist. People silence themselves to maintain harmony. But harmony built on silence is fragile. It cracks under pressure. English, imperfect as it was, forced me to stop hiding. Because silence was costing more than mistakes ever could. The first time I said something emotional in broken English, it felt risky. My grammar collapsed. My structure disappeared. But my meaning survived. And that surprised me. Meaning doesn't need elegance. It needs courage. Research on communication confirms this. Emotional authenticity increases perceived trust, even when linguistic accuracy is low. People respond more to honesty than to correctness. That day, I wasn't fluent. But I was heard. Once that happened, something shifted internally. English stopped being a barrier and became a bridge. Not because it was good enough, but because I used it anyway. And usage builds ownership. Ownership builds confidence. I also learned that having a voice doesn't mean talking more. It means being able to say what matters when it matters. Sometimes that's one sentence. Sometimes that's a pause followed by honesty. Voice is not volume. It's presence. In real life, English gave me access to emotional tools I didn't realize I needed. Simple phrases like "I feel overwhelmed" or "I need help" became anchors. They weren't poetic. They were functional. And functionality is underrated in emotional communication. Language researchers talk about threshold vocabulary, a set of words that unlock participation. You don't need thousands of words to be present in a relationship. You need the right few. Once I focused on those, everything changed. I stopped trying to sound strong. I sounded clear instead. That clarity allowed others to respond appropriately. Misunderstandings decreased. Assumptions softened. Connection improved. This also changed how I practiced English. I practiced expression, not correctness. I practiced saying uncomfortable things kindly. I practiced asking for clarification instead of pretending. These skills matter more than advanced grammar in real relationships. Neuroscience explains why this worked. Speaking honestly reduces internal tension. Reduced tension improves cognitive performance. When the brain isn't busy suppressing emotion, it has more capacity for language. Expression supports learning. There's a feedback loop here that most learners never notice. Silence increases anxiety. Anxiety blocks language. Blocked language increases silence. Breaking the loop requires action, not perfection. English saved my voice because it forced me to risk being misunderstood. And once I survived that risk, fear lost power. Not completely, but enough. In my marriage, this meant fewer unspoken resentments. More small corrections before big explosions. More alignment. Not because English improved dramatically, but because I used it consistently. If you're learning English and feel like you're disappearing in conversations, this is for you. You don't need better vocabulary to exist. You need permission to take space. Your accent is not an apology. Your pauses are not weaknesses. They're signs of thought. Voice returns when you decide that being understood matters more than being perfect. When you choose presence over performance. When you accept that language is a living thing, not a test score. English didn't save my voice by making me fluent. It saved my voice by making me brave enough to speak anyway. And once your voice returns, staying in a relationship, in a country, in a process, stops feeling like endurance. It starts feeling like participation. Staying for love. Why do you stay? People ask me that question more than I expected. They ask it quietly, like they are afraid of the answer. Sometimes they ask it directly, without any softness at all. Why do you stay? They ask when they see the scars in my story. They ask when they hear about the misunderstandings. They ask when they learn about the long nights, the silence, the distance we once had. For a long time, I didn't know how to answer. Because the truth is simple, but not easy to explain. I stay because love changed. And so did I. There was a time when staying felt like a question itself. Every day, I woke up unsure. Unsure of us. Unsure of the future. Unsure of my own heart. Love was loud back then. It demanded answers. It demanded proof. It demanded certainty. And I was tired. But love does not always stay loud. Sometimes, love grows quiet. Not because it is dying, but because it is learning how to breathe. One evening, we sat together in the living room. No music. No phones. Just a soft lamp and 2 cups of tea. You looked at me and asked, "Are you still here?" Not "Do you love me?" Not "Will you stay forever?" Just, "Are you still here?" That question changed everything. Because I realized something important in that moment. Staying is not about promises. It is about presence. I was still there. And so were you. We didn't fix everything at once. We didn't suddenly become perfect. We didn't erase the past. But we learned how to sit with it. We learned how to listen without interrupting. We learned how to apologize without excuses. We learned how to forgive without keeping score. Love stopped being something we talked about. It became something we practiced. Every morning, in small ways. You made coffee the way I like it. I folded the laundry even when I was tired. You asked how my day really was, and waited for the answer. I learned to say how I felt, even when my voice shook. This is the part people don't always understand. Love is not the reason I stay. Love is what grows because I stay. Staying means choosing the same person again. Not because it is easy, but because it is meaningful. One day, someone asked me again, "Why do you stay?" This time, I smiled. I told them the truth. I stay because when the world feels heavy, this is the place where I can rest. I stay because even in silence, I am not lonely. I stay because we don't run anymore, we talk. I stay because love here is not perfect, but it is honest. There was a moment not long ago. A very small moment. You were half asleep on the couch. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching. Your head rested on my shoulder. Nothing special happened. And yet, my heart felt full. That's when I understood. Love is not the big dramatic scenes. It is not the storms. It is not the tests. Love is peace. And peace is rare. We still disagree sometimes. We still misunderstand each other. We are still learning. But now, when things get hard, we ask a different question. Not should we leave, but how do we stay better? That question changes the direction of everything. Staying is not weakness. It is courage. It is waking up and choosing patience. It is choosing kindness when pride wants to speak. It is choosing growth over escape. If you ask me now, why do you stay? Here is my answer. I stay because love here does not try to own me. It walks beside me. I stay because I am allowed to change. And you change too. And we still choose each other. I stay because home is not a place. It is a feeling. And I feel it when I am with you. Maybe one day, someone will hear my story and think, I could never do that. That's okay. Everyone's love is different. But if you are listening right now, and you are asking yourself the same question, why do I stay? I hope you listen carefully. Not to fear. Not to habit. Not to loneliness. Listen to peace. Because when love is right, staying does not feel like losing yourself. It feels like finally being found. And that is why I stay. A final thought before you go. Before you close this video, let me ask you one last question. If someone looked at your life, your relationship, your choices, and asked you quietly, why do you stay? What would your answer be? Maybe you're staying for love. Maybe you're staying for hope. Or maybe you're still searching for the reason. Whatever your answer is, remember this. Your story matters. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is not to leave, not to fight, not to prove anything to the world, but to stay, with open eyes, an honest heart, and the courage to grow. This channel was created for stories like that. Stories that don't shout. Stories that breathe slowly. Stories that help you learn English naturally, while also learning something about yourself. If this story made you pause, if it made you think, or if it simply kept you company tonight, please like this video. This helps the YouTube algorithm understand that this story needs to reach people who might need it. Subscribe to the channel for more slow, clear English stories about love, life, and real choices. New videos every week, designed to help you listen better, read deeper, and speak with confidence. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell, so you won't miss the next story. Because the next question might be even harder. And the next story might feel uncomfortably familiar. Until then, thank you for staying with me until the end. And remember, sometimes, staying is where the real story begins.